oldest son and I lived at the W.B. Du Bois College House at the University of Pennsylvania for 8 years. It's located at 3900 Walnut Street. My office is at 37th and Walnut Street. Because I'm busy often, I'm often late. And because I hate to walk, I usually run places. A black man running down a city street is kind of scary to people. Who knew? As I watched people being scared of me, I thought maybe I should make them feel at ease by wearing a sign with my resume on it. But people who wear signs usually prophesy the end of the world. I thought maybe I should yell out and tell people, hey, I'm Dr. Stevenson, you're safe, everything's okay. But people who start talking unprompted in public usually ask for donations. So I'm frustrated. I keep running to my own office at 37th and Walnut, and I get and rush onto the elevator. In the process, I see the very same fight, flight, and fright reactions of the people, and I'm overwhelmed. At that point, I say, listen, people, I'm not going to take anything from you all today. I'm just late. And in that moment, there are people who are relieved, and when they are relieved, they're afraid to admit they're relieved, because that meant they were afraid of a black man in the first place, and that's politically incorrect. The shape-shifting in that moment is hilarious to me, but mostly it makes me think about the fact that racial encounters are some of the most stressful, the most scariest moments that we will ever face, and in less than 60 seconds. Imagine if we could change the knee-jerk reaction of police officers, of teachers, in that moment when they're face-to-face with children, adults who are black and brown in this society. Imagine how many children could come home from school, from those police encounters, safe and alive. I want to change that. I want to change the way that we look at the trauma that's going on for black and brown children and their families in this culture, and stop the assaults on black and brown people in our society. But it's going to take a racial literacy. Now, what is a racial literacy? A racial literacy is the ability to read, to recast, and to resolve a racially stressful encounter. It takes three things. One, we have to see stress first. Two, we have to teach racial stress management. And three, we have to try out these racial coping skills in the real world. Racial literacy takes practice. And I know some of you are saying, practice? Practice? We're talking about practice? Yes, we are talking about practice. First, seeing racial stress. The legacy of historical, systemic racial discrimination in our society has been traumatizing to all of us. And when we look at the systemic approaches to address these issues, we realize some very powerful things. That when people are threatened in a racial moment, they're overwhelmed. They're unable to access their own abilities, their own competencies, and they're unable to access the very basic things we think of as what involves teaching and policing in our society. We lose access to our memories. We lose access to empathy, and we treat people differently because we're trying to protect ourselves in that moment. Racial threat kills and does some very dangerous things. But I'm not sure the way that we approach systemic racism will help us in a face-to-face encounter. And so in many respects, what we know is when people are faced with a racial elephant, some people will respond to this moment as if it is on a scale of 10, on a stress scale of 1 or 2, like finding a rope or finding something you're very interested in. A lot of us, however, are afraid when we run into this racial elephant as if it's a 10, like facing a snake. We can do something about these moments of racial stress and threat, much more than we can change systemic discrimination. How do we do that? Well, we've got to see it first before we can face it. Secondly, we must teach racial stress management skills. Racial stress management skills, in the work that I've been doing for the last 25 years with other colleagues, can be summed up in this area of racial socialization. To what degree does it matter that families, that parents, that society teaches young people how to negotiate these moments of racial rejection? It so happens that we know that the more children get this feedback, the more they're able to emotionally regulate in areas of anxiety, depression, and anger. They're more engaging and more achieving in schooling contexts. Now, why does this happen? Well, one reason this might actually happen is because racial socialization builds a sense of confidence. That is, the more I get feedback about what to do when someone rejects me, the more I feel much able to engage as opposed to avoid these moments. And in many respects, I feel much more confident. There are two examples in which we have tried this out and practiced racial literacy and socialization. One of them is the Play Project, and the other is the Shape Up Project. The Play Project, which stands for Preventing Long-Term Anger and Aggression in Youth, is where we've used basketball and martial arts to get at the anger and aggression of boys at first, and now girls, and now their parents. What we've learned is not only do children figure out how to problem solve on a basketball court, but the same rejections they experience there mimic the rejections they experience in the classroom and on street corners. The Shape Up Project is a project in which we target African-American barbers in the city of Philadelphia, where we train them to teach risk reduction skills in two areas. One, unsafe, unprotected sex. The other, retaliation violence. The key thing about this training is that we train the barbers to deliver these skills while they're cutting the hair of their patrons, who are 18 to 24-year-old black men throughout the city of Philadelphia. We've reached about 700 men at this point in time. And in many respects, they're using the very same skills that the 5th graders and 12th graders, 5th through 12th graders that we train in the Play Project. What are those skills? And can educators use these skills as well? Absolutely. The skills can be summed up in these 3 words. We ask them to calculate, locate, and communicate. Breathe and exhale. Calculate is, to what degree do I feel stressed in this racial rejection moment on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being not stressed at all, 10 being like facing a snake. Locate is where in my body do I feel it, and the more specific I am about that, the more I can deal with it and manage it and reduce it. Thirdly, locate. Communicate. To what degree do I say to myself, or do I notice what I say to myself when I'm in that racial rejection moment? Of course, breathe and exhale is important, and in the process, we found that not only students from 5th to 12th grade, not only young adult black men in the city of Philadelphia can learn to use these skills, they use them in their relationships with their partners on public transportation. So in many respects, do I believe we can deal with these issues around racial threat? Absolutely. And I believe not only can we as students engage in these practices, but also educators. If we practice to calculate, locate, and communicate, breathe and exhale. I have 2 boys. One is 11 years old and the other is 25 years old. And we're not going to talk about how that happened. But in my heart, these 2 boys are still my babies. And my fear is, how will the world see them when they walk into the earth? So my hope, my wish, my prayer is if they should be running or walking down the street or just breathing, and they run into a police officer or a teacher or even you, that you would take the time to calculate, locate, communicate, and see my child or children like your child and children, and then you will send them back home to me. Thank you very much.